about me. My name is Morris Vanway. I don't know if you ever heard of me. I was born and raised here in Shelbyville, Indiana. Born in October of 1900 and worked here and actually passed away in October of 1988. Now in 1904, my father, Harry Vanway, whose grave is right there, purchased a building here in town, a two-story brick triangular shaped building that sits on South Harrison Street at the intersection of Harrison, Jefferson Avenue and 1st Street. Have you idea what I'm talking about? Which is now, they told me today, was called Buck's Plumbing Supply. It has a plumbing supply store. My father bought that building in 1904. I ran what we, back in those days, was called a confectionery shop. Any idea what I'm talking about? Confectionery being sweets. What you call a chocolate shop today.
Oh, there's one opening across the street, by the way.
Is there?
Yeah.
And he also had a cigar store there. Now, back when I was a young child, I was very interested in what you all today call electronics. But it was in the infancy stage. We didn't call it electronics, we call it wireless telegraphy back in those days. Because you have to understand, I was born in 1900. 1 year before I was born, Marconi sent the first wireless message across the English Channel. In 1902, they did the first transatlantic wireless message. And in 1915, they actually sent a voice message across the United States from New York to San Francisco. And they sent one across the Atlantic from Arlington, Virginia to a little receiving tower in Paris, France called the Eiffel Tower. That was the receiving tower. Now, there were 5 of us boys ran around together. We were just enthralled by the idea of radios. But like you said, there wasn't a lot available. You couldn't buy them, so you'd had to make them. We used to go down the junkyard and get coiled magnets, take the wire, make what we called crystal receiving sets. Our transmitter, we actually called it a spark gap machine. We'd send it over here to our crystal receiving set, would pick it up, we'd be in the same room sending messages to each other because we wouldn't talk like they do kids nowadays. You don't talk, just send messages to each other. In 1916, I was introduced to a radio tube, which you're too young to know what a tube is for a radio, but there was such a revolutionary idea in the time, it opened up unlimited possibilities. That tube in the right hand of the right person with the knowledge to build a radio set, receiver, could pick up broadcasts not only from outside the room, but from outside the city you lived in. I graduated high school in 1918, took over the 2nd floor of my dad's shop, and I call it my tinkering room. I used to work with radios and things like that at the time. In 1919, 2 major events happened. First would be on June the 11th, I married the love of my life, Helen Ross, who lies next to me in our grave here. Helen and I remained in love and stayed married until she passed away in 1986. And also in 1919, I built the first radio that was ever in Shelbyville, Indiana. When word got out, people from the city and the county came to the shop because they wanted to hear this revolutionary new idea. I won't say they couldn't believe their eyes, but they couldn't believe their ears. And actually, I had good friends of mine thought we were perpetrating a hoax on them because they thought somebody was in the other room somehow projecting their voice to this box. Now, from 1920 through 1937, I worked in my shop out of the 2nd floor there, built and repaired radios. Actually, in the mid-20s, Paul Meltzer, a good friend of mine from childhood, we made what we called an 8-tube super heterodyne radio that we had a contract with Ralph Showers, who owned the Indiana Cash Drawer business here in town, built walnut cabinets for us to our specifications. We had cabinets sent to the shop, we'd install the radios, and we probably sold more than 100 of them that were shipped throughout the United States back at that time. As time progressed, radios became commercially available, so we went ahead and put our energies elsewhere. Now, the next progression in what you call electronics from radio would be television. In 1920, We understood the concept of television, but we didn't have the means to make them. In 1927, I heard of a radio station out of Schenectady, New York, that was owned by the General Electric Corporation, that would shut down the radio broadcasts in the evening, and at night they would send out via radio waves experimental test pattern pictures. I heard about this, it intrigued me, so in 1927, 20 some odd years before television became available to the general public, I decided to make a television set, a receiver. And I did. Now granted, the screen was just about 1.5 inches, but you can't believe my surprise and joy when I sat in the second story of my dad's shop in the middle of the night in Shelbyville, Indiana, and looked down, and on my TV screen there was a test pattern that had been transmitted from Schenectady, New York. Actually, that machine you can hold in your hand. If you ever get up to the Indiana State Museum, it's on display there, on permanent display. When the Depression hit, I was like everybody else. We did what we had to do to provide for your family and to pay the bills. So I got away more from the radios and television, and I went to what I created the Vanguard alarm system, which are burglar alarms that were installed on chicken coops. Because back in those days, a lot of people had chicken coops that would alert the owner of a thievery going on, either by animals or humans. I built and developed and built gas heaters for home heating. A project which now you know is smoke detectors. I mean, I didn't come up with a finished product, but through progression down the years, it ended up being smoke detectors. Back in those times, what they called talkies at the movie theaters was happening. I designed and built machinery and installed them in Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, and Florida for talkies. I was fortunate enough in 1940 to get a job with the RCA Corporation, and my wife and I are very happy because now we had a steady income we could rely on. And so in 1940, my father had passed away the year prior. We went ahead and bought the commercial building he owned and the house next to it. We moved into that house in 1940 and actually lived there until both of us passed away in the late 80s. The first 5 years I worked at RCA. Most of the projects were geared towards the war effort of World War II. But you have to understand, in 1940, any research, development done on any type of what we know as electronic equipment was governed by the United States Navy. I was approached by the Navy to build what they called an infrared snooper scope, which developed what you nowadays know as night vision. They wouldn't allow it, it's such a top secret thing, they wouldn't allow it to be done at the factory because too many people may know about it. So through deliberations, it was decided we'd go ahead and build it in my shop here in Shelbyville, Indiana. 5 people were involved. 4 people came in every day, worked. At the end of the day, they went home to their respective homes. And I was the only one out of the 5 who knew what the end project was going to be. I would test it out at night. I'd set up the second story window of the shop. And I wouldn't spy on my neighbors, but I'd be able to see what was going on in the dark in the neighborhood. Now, the Navy wanted to put up a fence and a perimeter around my house and my business. They wanted armed guards to patrol the area, but I told them we don't do that in Shelbyville. That's only going to attract attention. If you want a secret project going on, just let us do it, and they allowed it. I developed radar equipment that the Russians used in World War II, because back then they were our allies. Worked with the team that made what we called a clear coating that went on the bomb sights of airplanes and on the gun sights of artillery. Worked with the team in radar and what we called underwater sound detection, which you know is sonar. Retired in 1970 at 70 years of age. My wife and I said, that's enough, let's go enjoy life. Took a trip to Europe, ended up in Ireland, drank some Irish stout beer, and I loved it. sat in that pub in Ireland and said, when I get home, I'm going to make this. And so when I came home, I devised a formula and I made my beer. My friends called it crankcase stout because they said it was as thick as the oil in the crankcase of your car. But they never refused to drink it when I offered to. I had an interest in guns. That was more of a hobby. Never had a collection, but I enjoyed muzzle loading more than anything. I was the national president of the Muzzleloaders Rifle Association from 1948 to 1962. And as I told every group, the young ones here is don't ever outside it unless your parents tell you. Don't ever accept someone when they say you can't do it. Because when we talked the concept of television, just you can't do it because it just didn't exist. Through hard work, perseverance, testing, I did it. And as I tell the older people here, let the younger ones do it. Hey, we've done ours, enjoy what we have left in life, because you never know. Next year, somebody may be standing back over there talking about what you've accomplished in your past life.